Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Ichon. Our guest this week is Clark Judge, chairman of the Pacific Research Institute and founder of the White House Writers Group. Now that election season is over, we couldn't think of a better person to have on the podcast to help us unpack it all. Tim and I, PRI Senior Director of Communications, and I have a conversation with Clark about the future of the conservative and free market movement, the consequences of divided government, and what advice would Clark give to Mr. Biden and President Trump. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Next Round, Clark.
Thank you, Ro. Thank you. And Tim.
So as of this recording, Joe Biden is now widely accepted as the president-elect, but President Trump continues to challenge the vote count in the courts. Do you think that there are enough questionable votes to change the election results? If not, should the president concede?
Well, I was looking at the numbers this morning, and if I were he, I would not concede at this point. Let them sound and fury. It signifies nothing. There are a lot of reasons to think there was widespread fraud, sort of on an industrial scale, in some very specific states and cities: Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, possibly Atlanta. For the integrity of future elections, those ought to be very, very closely looked at before conceding, because otherwise you're simply saying next time do it again because nobody cares. Having said that, once that's done and the audits are done, some attempt to look at what seem to have been the more innovative ways of having fraud, then yes, he should concede. And he will. The Democrats have been floating this kind of fevered dream for years now. Oh, he won't concede. He won't walk away. What are we going to have to do? Move in the army? Well, on noon on, I guess it's January 20th, he ceases to be president. He's a private citizen, and the Secret Service escorts him out of the White House if it comes to that, but it won't come to that. At some point, he should concede. The thing that concerns me is, let's ask ourselves, what if it turns out that there's a high probability of fraudulence that you can detect, you can quantify, and the result of it will be, say, Michigan or Pennsylvania flips and the election goes the other way. But it requires the act of a judge to rule on in some way or another. Yes, go into that. Yes, you need more than a recount, but yes, recount, or yes, audit. You must do that. And what judges know, if they know that that the election results will rest on them, are there judges who would make that decision? I don't know. And would the Supreme Court? We know that Chief Justice Roberts, and I think for good reason, is trying to break the political branch's habit of tossing every knotty question over to the Supreme Court. He's right to be pushing on that. But would he say we must not go ahead with that, or find a way to sidestep it? He may well. I think he feels that Bush v. Gore resulted in a real hit to the court's integrity with a section of the political world. And he's right, it did. Democrats haven't forgiven them. People look at it closely and disinterestedly. Yes, the court did the right thing and it did the constitutional thing, but that's not going to satisfy the political party that came up short on that. And so, these are difficult, but that's not the question of should the president concede. When the time comes, he should, and it probably will come.
So I'm always fascinated in kind of the behind the scenes of what's going on during interesting moments in our history like this. So what's it like in an administration when you lose the election? And what goes into having to actually write and make a concession statement? And is it hard to get staff who may soon be out of work to stay to the end to make sure the government functions?
If you're in the White House, you're at the top of a game, and one of the elements of a game is things go badly and you suck it up and you do what you have to do. Do staff stay? Well, the staff will be looking, but there's a loyalty and a desire to go out with dignity. We see that over and over again. The Obama people didn't really accept, even less than the Clinton people did, the outcome of the election, but they seem to have, at the very top, have been encouraging the kind of questioning and challenges of the last 4 years. But I think at the end, you just suck it up, you work for the best of the country, and the best of the country is a peaceful transition. That overrides everything. And even those who have been disinclined have understood that.
So along those same lines, Clark, what happens with political appointees and this process of turning over the administration? Do thousands really lose their jobs? And who's usually the last one to turn off the lights on January 20th at noon? And I've got my own opinions on this because, Clark and I were together. But what do you think?
Well, everybody's looking for a job, and generally, White House credential is a pretty good credential. But you go into these jobs, the political jobs in administration, saying, with the eye towards, this is going to last only so long. You lost the election, you're leaving. Or you won the election, but the new president has his own ideas of his own people coming in, though he's in the same party. There's always that turnover, win or lose at the end of an administration. It isn't quite right to say thousands lose their jobs, but most of the political appointees are looking for new jobs. Those who aren't are those who either had something lined up or going back to something they had before. And this isn't insignificant. In any administration, there are a number of people who say, well, working in the government's a pretty good job. And so they get themselves what they call careered in. So thousands, well, not as many as you'd think, but yeah, you're out of a job if you're not in those.
Who turns off the lights last, Clark? I have an opinion on this, but I wonder what you think.
You mean do the speechwriters? Roe worked in the speechwriting in the Reagan White House. My feeling, Roe, is that the lights never turned off. It comes to noon on January 20th, I guess, and the other guys are already in. There's an awful lot of continuity in the government. Now, what's your answer, Ro? You tell me.
Well, I think, and I think I'm absolutely right about this. I think it's the lawyers. They're always the last ones to leave because, there's a lot of paperwork, transition work that has to be done. And usually they're the ones who are asked to hang on until the very last moment to make sure that, all of the classified documents and so on and so forth are properly handed over and things like that. So it's usually the lawyers, and actually some of them, maybe one or two of them are actually asked to stay on to make that transition happen.
Well, I think that's very shrewd, very observant, and basically right in that sense. And I'd agree with that.
So let's look at kind of where we are politically right now. While there will be runoffs for both Georgia's Senate seats, and we don't, I can't imagine what the poor people of Georgia are going to go through in their telephones and texts and mailboxes and emails over the next several weeks. Given that, it's likely that Republicans are going to contain control of the Senate, and they've gained seats in the House. So what do you think this outcome says about where the electorate's at today?
In 2001, Michael Barone wrote an essay. It was really the introduction to the Almanac of American Politics, and it was published widely, independently of the Almanac. It was called The 49% Nation. He said that the United States had been in a period of very close division between the parties that was unmatched in any period other than, I think he said, the 1880s. And he said things that came out of that were you had some elections. You had one election where the candidate who won the popular vote did not win the electoral vote. And you also had close division between the two houses of Congress, and the presidency went back and forth a bit. Went back and forth basically every term for a while. And he said, now that's the 1880s. We're in that same kind of period then, writing after the 2000 election. His implication was this too will pass. Well, we're now almost 20 years later, and it has not. You ask about the Senate control. I think that the Republicans will win, and Perdue, I can't imagine him not winning. He almost had 50% before, and Georgia isn't that close that someone who's really one of the most popular people in the state won't get reelected. The woman whose name escapes me right now, she is more a question, but I think with Perdue acting as a coattails, I think she's in good shape too. So that means that the Republicans, it becomes a 52-48 Senate, which we've seen so long as the Republicans hold together, that it will be extremely difficult for the Democrats to get their really frightening program through. There's already talk, though, of expansive use, which the Democrats did in both of their last administrations, expansive, aggressive use of presidential orders, executive orders. President Trump used executive orders, but mainly, almost entirely, to undo what the Democrats had so expansively done during the Obama years. That signals to me that they're going to do much, much more under Biden, and there won't be a way to undo it, because basically to undo it, you have to have both houses of Congress to block the president from expansive use of executive orders. What does it say about the electorate? What it says about the electorate is this is still a 49% nation. 20 years after Michael Barone wrote, this is a 49% nation. The one thing I would say that's changed is the Democrats can't win on their platforms. So can they win if they enact their platforms one way or another? Will the country live with it? And I don't think we know the answer. Right now, it's a 49% country, and it's been there for 20 years or more.
So, Clark, let's get your take on the conservative movement. It was just a couple of weeks ago, frankly, when many thought that our movement, the conservative free market movement, was losing ground, and that European-style socialism, social justice, progressivism was on the rise. Given the results of the election, where do you think we stand today?
Where we were before. The whole talk about European-style socialism, social justice, progressivism being on the rise was driven by the polls, and the polls were wrong. We can go into why the polls were wrong, but it just didn't happen. And again, we're very closely divided. There was a report. Now, that doesn't mean that the incoming administration won't be an aggressively progressive administration. It will. This morning, there was a report that the head of Black Lives Matter had called for, not really requested, but demanded a meeting with the at least putative president-elect, and with saying, we put you here and you're going to do what we say, essentially. Now, I think Joe Biden and the people around him, I think he personally is a weak man, weak in spirit, weak in character, weak in sense of purpose. And my guess is he'll be pushed around a lot unless others within the party push back. There may be, we've heard about the Virginia Congresswoman who said we should never say the word socialist again. Well, you may not say the word. And it sounds as though she was shocked that she was in a party that had the kinds of people in it who dominated the discussion this time around. But she is. And it's not clear to me that there's much energy in the center on the Democratic Party. Certainly the discussion over the last 2, 3, 4 years, certainly since they took control of the House, all of the energy has been on the left, and nobody on the right has been willing to push back in any significant way. And so what can we expect? I think it won't be quite as extreme, maybe, I hope, as their platform, but it'll be pretty close.
So, Clark, looking back in the last 4 years, how has the conservative free market movement changed under Trump? What do you think Trump's legacy will be to the movement and to the party?
I think in a lot of ways, we had a very good 4 years, which is why the economy came back so strong. And though it took a hit with COVID, why it's coming back so strongly now. Tax rates went down in a way that encouraged was broad and in a way that encouraged a lot of investment and job creation. The Obama and Biden people said, well, we created that recovery. Well, no, you didn't. there was a reason that the wages for the less paid workers were going down in that period, and the incomes of the wealthy were going up so hard, substantially. The wealthy because of asset appreciation, the lower paid people because there weren't that many jobs. There were a lot of people in part-time work. And in fact, who was it? One of the conservative economists took a look at the numbers in the last year of the Obama administration, numbers of hours worked, and divided them by 40 and found that by that count, we had essentially, I think it was 10, 15%, maybe 20 unemployment rate. That is to say, a lot of the recorded jobs were part-time jobs, and when they weren't paying full-time wages. So what happens with that? First, their incomes aren't as large, and the incomes of people who do have part-time wages, they have no market power. They can't bid them up. And that's why that number was there. Well, that was reversed under President, and the tax cuts, if we've ever had proof that lower taxes can lead to higher pay at the lower end, that was it. Now, what else happened in that period? Deregulation. A lot of the reason, in my judgment, for the President Trump's aggressiveness in tweeting and other things was to distract the press away from what they were doing with deregulation. Ro, you'll remember during the Reagan years that there was some deregulation of school lunches, and somebody wrote a memo that said, well, ketchup should be included as vegetables. Well, in terms of nutrition, that's probably right. But ketchup as a vegetable became the left's and the press's cry of the callousness of the Republican Party. That was a deregulation move, actually, in essence. Well, the Trump people understood that there was no way to push back, and I'd say the president understood. There was no way to push back against the press and the echo chamber in Washington on these deregulation matters. It would always be to our disadvantage to a point that our people in Congress, our people in the administration would not have the fortitude to stand up. So what did he do? He created a distraction. I mentioned this as a theory someplace in the end of the first, sometime early in the second year, and or midway through the second year. And there was somebody in the room who said, yeah, in my department, we had a deregulation move, and we thought that we were going to take weeks of hell for it. And we put it out, and the first day we did. The morning of the second day, he tweeted something outrageous, and it went away. The press's interest in this regulation went away. And so they were able to see it through. It was those moves and that kind of interplay and use of social media, Twitter, not to reach the people as a mass medium, it isn't, but to ignite the press and get control of the news cycle that allowed for the very, very broad deregulation. So we had a good year. You're asking free market. We had a good 4 years in getting the economy going in a way that benefited everyone. The area that was most contentious in our quarters were the president's trade policies protectionist, or were they an adjustment to poorly negotiated and poorly thought through trade agreements in the prior really 12 years, 16 years. And I think that what we've seen was he had a much better point than he made in public on that there were a lot of problems with how trade deals had been negotiated to the detriment of workers in the American economy. And we needed to have a revisiting of that. That having said that isn't how many people in the free market movement see things. But I think he made a good broad point, but the defense of it was not good. Where does that leave us? I think what we've seen you asked about earlier about the congressional elections versus the presidential elections. The presidential elections right now, the popular vote is being driven by the collapse of the Republican Party in California, New York, and the District of Columbia. The Congress is being driven by the rest of the country. I think we had a very good 4 years in the rest of the country, but in these centers of power and culture, there's still we have to, if we're going to get some balance and break the 49% nation, we can't be conceding those parts of the country, certainly California and New York, and we're nowhere close to contesting them now.
So going forward in what looks like is going to be a post-Trump world, what do you think should be the strategy of the conservative movement over the next few years?
I would say stand by your principles. Be aware that, particularly in a group that we absolutely know we must have, which is Americans without a college degree, maybe with just high school, maybe with a year or two of college, maybe with less than high school. But that quadrant, that group of Americans are very important to us. Ronald Reagan knew that group was very important to us. And a lot of the way Ronald Reagan addressed the country had to do with that group in mind. Donald Trump knew it. I don't think Mitt Romney knew it. George Bush didn't really, George W. Bush. And we saw that that addressing that group created in style, at least in the style that President Trump did it, maybe even in the substance, got a lot of pushback from some loud voices that were small in number in the party. I don't think in the end those voices had any impact on anything in this election. The Never-Trumpers were a non-entity. But if anything, the Republican Party was at least and maybe even more united than the Democratic Party. I'm not sure we actually know yet because of the squirreliness of some of the results. But we need to be speaking to that group as well as the rest. And we need to be asking, what is it we can do, say, advocate to break the 49% nation? The other side will be doing it, and they'll be doing it in ugly ways, asking the same questions and trying to do that. We need to stand firm when the administration is going off in the Looney Tunes liberal direction. We need to push back on that. We need to not concede the ground when they come up with something that sounds like they're doing things that are helping everybody and we're doing things that hurt everybody. That we know right now that whatever the facts are, they will always make that their case. We see too that a lot of Republican voters feel that Republican office holders and Republican voices have been way too weak-kneed and spineless in pushing back. We need to make our case. We need to make it strong. Needs to be everywhere. We need to have room for new voices. This kind of very broad-based movement, which the conservative movement has become. We need to understand that and make room for all the broad base and stand up for what we believe in and know is right.
So, Clark, if you were advising Trump right now, what are the three things you would tell him?
See this through, then be gracious. And towards the end of the campaign, he was also showing humor. And he, in his rallies, I think he should be, to the degree that he remains a public figure, showing humor and showing a lighter side. I do think that there's a question now of whether he wants to, will, and can remain a strong public voice. I'm kind of undecided on that. I think you've got some very strong voices coming up. Tom Cotton is an obvious example. Josh Hawley. You've got several governors who are very strong examples. Obviously, the governor of Florida is one of them. So whether or not there's room for the president is another matter. The biggest negative on him was, and it was widely shared, was his the harshness of his tone at times. His administration was very much broadly a very conservative administration, very restrained in its use of the powers of the presidency and powers generally. The handling of the COVID crisis, which I think, was brilliant. We're going to have a vaccine and maybe some cures. A vaccine is a preventative and maybe some cures. So if you get it, you can get rid of it fast, the way penicillin was a cure, very quickly. That wouldn't have happened in the kind of administration President-elect Biden has advocated, because he was for all of the regulation that has long held back pharmaceutical innovation. President Trump took those regulations, reduced them in a prudent way, and we now have, I think I read this morning, there may be as many as 100 potential vaccines coming on the market. I know for certain there are a number of potential cures that are in the last stages of testing right now, and so and that wouldn't have happened without him. They didn't make a good enough case on that, but I think that they should. That part of what we're doing right now is standing by that and stating that he should do it. He should take the credit, and others who worked with him should give the credit to him in the years ahead and drive that in, and we'll see where we go from there.
So let me ask you the flip side of that question. If you were advising Joe Biden right now, what are the three things you would advise?
Yeah, I would say that the first thing is don't listen to AOC and don't listen to Bernie Sanders, and don't stock your administration with those kinds of people. You were elected because you were seen as what you said you were in the first debate, as President Trump was pounding on him about the radical policies. Mr. Biden said, I am the Democratic Party, okay? If you're the Democrat, and he said, essentially, forget about all those radical people. I'm it, and I'm moderate. The first sign of whether he is will be the people he puts in his cabinet. He puts a bunch of right-wingers and left-wingers in positions where they can run wild, hear their inner child, and go about screaming and then I think a lot of the country is going to be, and markets and other things will be very, very alarmed, and he has to stand up to them. Do I think he will? I've said, I think he's not a strong man. No, I don't think he will. If he wants a successful administration, he must, and stand up to them. We have seen administrations in the past where you could see in the Republican as well as Democrat, where you could see in the opening week that the administration was going to be in trouble because these kinds of decisions were not made in a way that would ensure reelection, and also that were really consistent with the campaigns they'd run. I mentioned the Black Lives Matter person, head. Well, she may think that the Black Lives Matter got Biden into office. She's trying to appropriate the entire African-American vote to that organization. Well, it doesn't belong to that organization. The Black vote was less Democrat than it's been before, not by huge percentages, but still less. And that, at least in my judgment, is that the Black population is changing, that it's more affluent, it's better educated, it's more likely to be in small businesses and professions, and attitudes are changing accordingly. When Black Lives Matter rampaged through Minneapolis and burned down stores and other buildings, those stores, many of them, maybe even most of them, were African-American owned, and the jobs that were destroyed in the various buildings were heavily African-American, partly by their choice of neighborhood. Continuing that and embracing that is not a way to win your own vote and hold your own vote, and it is a way to set us up for coming back again. And that's so I would tell him, you said the Democratic Party is you, so whatever choices you make are not the Democratic Party's. They're yours, and you're going to have to live with them. And you were elected. The reason it became a 49% nation again this time was you said you were a moderate, you were in the center. People believe that. And if you go wild to the left, they'll never believe in other words you say. And say, now, of course, he may not want a second term, but that's another matter.
So last question, Clark. We can't let you go without at least one question on California. So it's a popular saying that so goes California, so goes the country. So while Sacramento continues to have one-party rule and the coastal elites have, tremendous influence politically and socially in the state, under a potential Biden presidency, do you think California's progressive policies will expand nationally?
Well, first of all, I would say on the strength of about 20 years of experience right now, as goes California, so goes California. If the rest of the country goes Republican, California is so Democrat that it has ceased to be a real factor in the national election. You just factor them in and then go about, the whole debate will be someplace else. But do I think under Biden presidency that the California progressive policies will expand nationally? Yes, I do. Because I think, in fact, those policies are already the policies of the Democratic Party. And whether it's in taxes or something we haven't discussed and don't often discuss, land use policy. President Trump tried to get into this, made gestures at getting into this in the course of the campaign when he talked about the suburbs where the President Biden policies followed those of that we had seen in the Obama years, which was try to bring in multifamily housing into single-family suburbs, tried to do other things to change the character of the suburbs, make them less sort of small towns and more like inner cities. And I don't mean that in a racial sense. I mean it in a population density sense, in an economic sense. Very anti-suburb. Some of that is environmental orthodoxy. Some of it is the orthodoxy of the left generally. They're very anti-suburb. But it goes beyond that. The waters of the United States. There was also a rule, the Chesapeake watershed rule, which I know is so obscure nobody would know what it is, but it was basically it's like the waters of the United States. Anything that where rain falls and drains into towards the sea is water of the United States, giving essentially, as with the more urban things, control over total land use policy. We're going to see that again. We're going to see the same kinds of woke policies in social having to do with social issue question. There is no way that the California progressive policies won't expand nationally because they're already the policies of the Democratic Party. So, for us on the right, it's our input to the actual policy-making process will be to be able to stop legislation through the Senate, and maybe through some break in the Democratic ranks in the House. But, they seem to be, even the moderates vote radical when push comes to shove in the House. So it'll be on the Senate, and it will be a constant battle. And the fact is, they will then work around the Senate through an aggressive use of the Biden administration of executive orders, and we'll fight and we'll make our case, and they'll do all sorts of things that shouldn't be done. And that's going to be the next 4 years.
Well, it was great chatting with you, Clark, and thanks for taking
happy ending, right? Happy ending.
About California, we don't always have happy endings as usual, right, Tim?
Yes.
Well, not in politics there. It's such a wonderful state, and so vibrant, and seems to be trying to drain all the vibrancy out of it. It's really, really disturbing. And but it's a wonderful state. So we love it, even while it's being bad to itself.
Thanks again to our guest, Clark Judge. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and now iHeartRadio and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.